Jack Stone stared at the contract floating on his holoscreen, his weathered face reflected in the soft blue glow. 5 million credits for a simple protection detail. There had to be a catch. In 15 years as a mercenary, he'd never seen a paycheck this big for guarding someone. Do you find the terms unsatisfactory, Mr. Stone? The royal advisor's hologram flickered slightly as he spoke. The crystalline being's faceted surface caught the light, creating rainbow patterns in the dim room of Jack's small spaceship. The money's fine, Jack said, leaning back in his chair. What I don't understand is why you need a human mercenary to guard a member of the royal family. Don't you have an entire army of crystal warriors? The advisor's surface dimmed slightly. What passed for a frown among his kind? This assignment requires unique qualifications. The person you'll be protecting is Princess Anne, third in line to the Stellar Empire's throne. Jack raised an eyebrow. Everyone knew about Crown Prince Ray, the perfect crystalline hair, but he'd never heard of a princess. Go on. The princess was born with a rare genetic variation. She is different from our kind. The advisor's discomfort was clear in the way his crystal segments shifted uneasily. Her physical form is more flexible, more like your species. Now that was interesting. Jack had fought alongside the Crystal People during the Nexus Wars. They were incredible warriors, nearly indestructible, but rigid in both their physical form and thinking. A crystal being with human-like flexibility could be either a huge advantage or a serious liability. She needs protection from enemies of the Empire, Jack asked, already knowing there was more to the story. She needs protection from everyone, Mr. Stone, including, perhaps, some within the palace itself. The advisor's voice dropped lower. The princess's condition is seen as a mark of shame by many. She has spent most of her life in the secure wings of the palace, but recent events have made her isolation impossible to maintain. Jack pulled up the attached files, scanning through them quickly. Princess Anne had never appeared in any official photos or broadcasts. According to the limited medical data provided, her crystal structure was more cellular than crystalline, allowing her to move and adapt in ways her people couldn't. In a culture that prized rigid perfection, she was an aberration. Why me? Jack asked finally. There are plenty of mercenaries with better records. You fought beside our people in the Nexus Wars. You understand our ways, yet you think differently than we do. Like the princess. The advisor paused. And your combat style? Adaptable, unpredictable. It matches her unique capabilities. You can teach her to use her differences as strengths rather than hiding them as weaknesses. Jack stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the massive crystal ships that made up the royal fleet. The Empire valued order, structure, and unchanging tradition above all else. A princess who could change and adapt. No wonder they kept her hidden. When do I start? You'll be escorted to the palace immediately upon signing. The princess's security takes priority over all other concerns. The advisor's hologram brightened. Do we have an agreement? Jack looked at the contract one more time. 5 million credits, unlimited access to royal resources, and a mystery that went against everything he knew about the Crystal People. It would either be the easiest money he'd ever made or the job that finally got him killed. He pressed his thumb to the scanner. Contract accepted. The advisor's hologram bowed slightly. Welcome to the service of the Stellar Empire, Mr. Stone. May your flexibility serve you well. The hologram flickered out, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts and the growing feeling that he'd just stepped into something much bigger than a simple protection detail. Outside his viewport, a crystal shuttle detached from the royal flagship, heading toward his ship. Whatever he'd just gotten himself into, he'd find out soon enough. The royal palace was exactly what Jack expected. All sharp angles and perfect geometry, its crystal walls reaching impossibly high into the purple sky. What he didn't expect was the sound of combat coming from behind the door of Princess Anne's quarters. Princess, Jack called out, his hand moving to his weapon. The two crystal guards beside him shifted uncomfortably. The princess is exercising, one guard said, clearly disapproving. She does this often. Jack pushed open the door and stopped in his tracks. The room was a training arena, but unlike anything he'd seen in the Crystal Kingdoms. Instead of the usual rigid combat platforms, the space was filled with obstacles of varying heights and shapes. And in the middle of it all was Princess Anne. She moved like water. Her crystalline form caught the light like her people's did, but instead of sharp facets, her surface rippled and flowed. As Jack watched, she dove under a swinging practice drone, her body actually bending in ways that should have been impossible for her kind. The drone fired harmless training bolts, which she dodged with a grace that would make human gymnasts jealous. "You're early," she said, not stopping her routine. Her voice had the musical quality of all crystal beings, but with a warmth he'd never heard from them before. "I hope you don't mind if I finish this sequence." "Not at all, Your Highness." Jack leaned against the wall, studying her technique. She was good, really good, but her style was completely self-taught. A mix of moves she must have seen in combat videos and things her unique body had figured out on its own. The princess flipped over another drone, her form stretching in midair, then landed in a crouch that would have shattered a normal crystal being. The training program ended, and she turned to face Jack fully for the first time. She looked like living art, a crystal statue that somehow flowed and moved. Her face had actual expressions, something her people couldn't do with their rigid forms. Right now, she was smiling. "So you're the famous Jack Stone," she said, walking toward him. Even her walk was different, fluid instead of the stiff march of her people. "I've studied your combat records from the Nexus Wars. Your adaptability is remarkable." "And yours is impossible," Jack replied honestly. "I've never seen anyone move like that." Her smile faded slightly. "Yes, well, being a defect has its advantages, even if my family doesn't see it that way." Jack noticed the training room had no windows, and the walls were lined with sound-dampening material. They kept her hidden even here, in her own space. "Their loss," he said, "because what I just saw wasn't a defect. It was tactical advantage that nobody would see coming." Anne's expression brightened, and her crystalline surface actually shifted color slightly. "Another impossible thing. That's what I keep trying to tell them. Our warriors are incredible, but they're predictable. Every race knows exactly how a crystal being will move and fight. But me," she demonstrated by stretching her arm in a way that made Jack's joints hurt just watching. "You're a completely new kind of warrior," Jack finished. "One they don't have any defense against." "Exactly." Her enthusiasm was contagious. "Will you help me? I've learned what I can from combat recordings, but I need someone who understands adaptive fighting styles." Jack smiled. This wasn't the bitter, hidden-away princess he'd expected. This was a warrior looking for a teacher, and maybe an ally. "That's what they're paying me for," he said. "But first, show me that flip again. I want to see if we can modify it into something even their drones won't expect." Princess Anne's smile lit up the room, her crystalline form shimmering with excitement. For the first time, Jack thought that maybe this job would be more than just a paycheck. It might actually be fun. 3 weeks into Jack's new job, the attack came during dinner. Princess Anne was telling him about her latest training progress when his security scanner beeped softly. "Something's wrong," Jack said, standing up. "The guard rotation is early." Anne tilted her head, her crystalline form shifting slightly. "They never change rotation times without notice." The door chimed, and a guard's voice came through. "Security check, Your Highness." Jack moved silently to the side of the door, drawing his weapon. "Standard procedure is to announce checks an hour ahead," he whispered. "Get behind the table." Instead, Anne flowed into a fighting stance he taught her. Jack wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The door burst open, and 3 figures rushed in, not wearing guard uniforms, but the black armor of royal assassins. The first assassin fired a sonic disruptor, a weapon designed to shatter crystal beings. Anne dropped and rolled, her flexible form absorbing the vibrations that would have killed one of her people. Jack fired twice, hitting the attacker's weapon hand. The human protector, the lead assassin, snarled. "This would be easier if you'd taken your day off." "I don't take days off," Jack replied, diving behind a column as energy bolts scorched the wall behind him. "Princess, Pattern 3. Anne understood immediately. While Jack provided covering fire, she moved like flowing mercury, impossible to track or target. The assassins had trained to fight rigid crystal beings. Her fluid movement confused their aim. The prince said she'd be alone. One assassin shouted, then grunted as Anne's kick caught him in the midsection. Her flexible form let her hit harder than any crystal being could, and she'd been practicing. Jack's blood went cold. The prince, Crown Prince Ray, had ordered this. An assassin pressed a device on his wrist, and hidden speakers activated. A high-pitched whine filled the room, a telepathic command signal. Every crystal being in range would be forced to freeze. Except Anne didn't freeze. She didn't even flinch. "That's impossible," the lead assassin said. "The control signal doesn't work on me," Anne finished, her voice cold as she flowed around his defenses and struck 3 precise points Jack had taught her. The assassin crumpled. The fight ended quickly after that. Anne's immunity to their weapons and Jack's combat experience proved too much for attackers who'd expected an easy target. "The prince," Jack said, securing the unconscious assassins. They mentioned the prince. Anne's crystalline surface dimmed. "Ray, my perfect brother. Of course." She picked up the telepathic control device, studying it. "Did you know I can't connect to the royal network? They called it another defect. I can't receive or send telepathic signals like normal crystal beings." "That's not just a quirk of your biology, is it?" Jack asked, beginning to understand. Anne shook her head. "The royal network holds all the Empire's secrets. Every crystal being is connected, sharing thoughts, memories, and classified information. Except me." She smiled grimly. "I'm the only one they can't read or control." "Making you the perfect secret keeper," Jack said. "You're carrying information in your blocked connection and don't even know it. Information someone wants badly enough to kill for." "Information Ray doesn't want getting out," Anne added. "The perfect prince might not be so perfect after all." Jack checked his security feeds. More guards were coming. Real ones this time. "We need to move. He'll try again, and next time they'll be better prepared." Anne nodded, her form shifting into a more battle-ready stance. "Teach me more, Jack. If my brother wants me dead, I need to be better than impossible to control. I need to be impossible to kill." Looking at her determined expression, Jack almost felt sorry for the next batch of assassins. "Almost." "Again," Jack said, watching Anne move through the combat sequence. They had converted an old storage room into a secret training area, far from prying eyes. 2 weeks had passed since the assassination attempt, and they trained every moment they could spare. Anne flowed through the movements, her crystalline form rippling as she combined Jack's human combat techniques with her unique abilities. She could now stretch her arms twice their normal length, delivering strikes from unexpected angles. Her legs could compress and expand, letting her jump higher than any human or crystal being. "Better," Jack nodded, "but you're still thinking like them. Stop trying to be perfect. Be unpredictable." "Unpredictable isn't exactly encouraged in the royal family," Anne said, pausing to rest. Even her way of breathing was different from her people, more organic, more alive. Jack tossed her a water container. "Another difference, she needed to drink, just like humans. That's exactly why it'll keep you alive. Your brother's assassins expect crystal being tactics, perfect forms, precise movements. You're something new." Anne caught the container with an arm that stretched 3 feet longer than it should have. "Something wrong, you mean?" "That's what they've always told me." "No," Jack said firmly. "Something evolved. Your people's rigid forms made them strong, but predictable. You've evolved past that. Watch this. He pulled up a hologram showing standard crystal being combat forms. The movements were beautiful but mechanical, each step exactly measured. Now show me that last sequence again, he said. Anne moved through the forms again, but this time Jack projected her movements next to the standard ones. Where the crystal warrior moved in straight lines and sharp angles, Anne flowed like water, achieving the same goals but in ways impossible to predict or counter. See, Jack pointed to the comparison. You're not wrong. You're next level, the next step in your people's evolution. They're just too set in their ways to see it. Anne's surface shifted colors slightly, her version of a blush. You really believe that, don't you? You don't see me as a defect. I fought alongside crystal beings. They're incredible warriors, but every race in the galaxy knows exactly how they'll move and fight. Jack smiled. You're something they've never seen before, something they can't plan for. Anne was quiet for a moment, her surface rippling with emotion. Can I show you something? Something I've never shown anyone else. Jack nodded, curious. Anne moved to the center of the room. Slowly, her crystalline form began to change. Not just bending or stretching, but actually transforming. Her surface flowed like quicksilver, and suddenly Jack was looking at a perfect mirror image of himself. By the stars, he whispered. Anne shifted back to her normal form. I discovered I could do this a year ago. I was so scared to tell anyone. They already thought I was a monster. This is why they're really trying to kill you, Jack realized. Not just because you can't be controlled by the network. You can actually change your form completely. You could look like anyone. Including my brother, Anne said quietly. Including any royal family member. Now you understand why they're so afraid of me. Why they kept me hidden. Jack walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. Something that would have been too familiar with a normal crystal being, but felt right with her. They're not afraid of you. They're afraid of change, of evolution. But you can't stop evolution. Anne's surface brightened with determination. Teach me more. Not just fighting. Teach me human tactics, strategy. If I'm going to be something new, I want to be something better. Looking at her determined expression, Jack realized he'd stopped seeing her as just a client long ago. She was a student, a partner, and maybe something more. And he would make sure she survived to become whatever she was meant to be. All right then, he said, moving into a fighting stance. Let's give them something really worth being afraid of. The news of Crown Prince Ray's unexpected visit spread through the palace like wildfire. Jack watched through security feeds as the prince's personal guard swept through the halls, their crystal armor gleaming perfectly in the light. He never visits me, Anne said, standing beside Jack in their hidden training room. Not in 3 years. Which means he wants something. Jack checked his weapons discreetly. Or he's planning something. The door chimed, and Prince Ray entered. Unlike his sister's flowing form, the prince was all sharp angles and perfect geometry, the ideal of crystal being beauty. His surface caught the light in dazzling patterns, but his movements were stiff and precise. Dear sister, Ray's voice rang with artificial warmth. And the human protector. How? Cozy. Brother. Anne's voice was careful, controlled. Jack noticed she stood exactly as he taught her, seemingly relaxed, but ready to move in any direction. This is an unexpected honor. Can't a brother check on his sister's safety? Ray moved further into the room, his guards positioning themselves near the exits, especially after that unfortunate assassination attempt. Such a tragedy. Yes, Jack said flatly. Tragic how they knew exactly when the guard rotation would change, almost like they had inside information. Ray's surface flickered slightly, the equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Are you suggesting something, human? Just thinking out loud, Your Highness. It's a bad habit of my species. The prince turned back to Anne. Sister, I've come with wonderful news. Father has reconsidered your isolation. He's willing to let you return to court, under proper supervision, of course. Anne's surface rippled with surprise, But Jack saw her hands tense. After all these years, why now? The royal network has been unstable lately. Random data fluctuations, missing information. Father thinks your unique condition might help us understand what's happening. Jack kept his face neutral, but his mind raced. The prince wasn't just here to check on his assassination attempt's failure. He was fishing for information about the network. I can't connect to the network, Anne said. You know that. Perhaps not directly. Ray moved closer, his crystal form catching the light menacingly. But you might be storing data without knowing it. Our scientists have developed new scanning techniques. They're quite eager to examine you. The threat in his voice was clear. Jack stepped forward slightly. The princess's schedule is quite full with her protection training. Ah yes, the training. Ray looked around the room with disdain. Teaching a crystal being to fight like a human. How primitive. But then, primitive solutions to primitive beings. Anne's surface darkened with anger, but Jack touched her arm lightly. Their signal for patience. Thank you for the offer, brother, Anne said carefully. But I'm quite comfortable with my current arrangements. Are you? Ray's voice hardened. Comfortable hiding away with your human guard, practicing your aberrant abilities. You could be so much more, sister. You could be useful. She's not a data storage device, Jack said, his hand near his weapon. She's your sister. She is a tool, Ray snapped, his perfect composure cracking. A flawed, unpredictable tool, but one that might still serve the Empire. Don't pretend you care about her, mercenary. Everyone serves a purpose. You're right, Anne said quietly. Everyone does serve a purpose. What's yours, brother, besides making failed attempts on my life? The room went deadly still. Ray's surface froze in perfect, crystalline rage. Consider my offer, sister, he said finally. Things are changing in the Empire. Best to be on the right side when they do. He turned and left, his guards following in perfect formation. The door sealed behind them. He's planning something bigger, Jack said, checking for surveillance devices. That wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. Anne nodded, her form rippling with determination. Then we better be ready when it happens. Looking at her brother's retreating form on the security feed, she added softly, The Empire is changing, brother. Just not the way you think it will. The attack came at midnight. Jack was checking security feeds when every crystal guard in the palace suddenly stopped moving. Their forms froze in place, then their surfaces began glowing with an eerie red light. Anne, Jack shouted, running to her quarters. It's happening. The princess was already in motion, her flowing form ready for battle. The network. Ray's taken control of it somehow. The palace speakers crackled to life with Prince Ray's voice. Attention all subjects. The king has been found guilty of corruption. As heir, I am assuming control. Any resistance will be dealt with permanently. He's using the network to control everyone, Anne said, her surface rippling with anger. Every crystal being in the palace is now his puppet. A crash echoed through the corridor as controlled guards began breaking down doors, searching for them. Jack pulled out his weapons and checked them quickly. Not everyone, he said. He can't control you, and he definitely can't control me. Anne smiled grimly. 2 against an army. Just how I like it. The door burst open, and controlled guards poured in. Their movements were different now, jerky and aggressive, all their usual grace replaced by Ray's brutal commands through the network. Jack fired stunning shots, while Anne moved like liquid mercury between the guards. All their training paid off as they fought in perfect sync, Jack providing covering fire, while Anne used her unique abilities to outmaneuver her mind-control people. We need to reach the network control room, Anne said, flowing around a guard's attack and disabling him with a strike to a key crystal point. It's where Ray will be. It's the only place he can broadcast the control signal from. Through about 500 controlled guards, Jack added, stunning 2 more attackers. No pressure. They fought their way through the palace corridors, Jack's human combat experience, and Anne's impossible movements keeping them ahead of the controlled guards. Her ability to stretch and compress her form let her slip through gaps and attack from unexpected angles, while Jack's unconventional tactics confused guards trained for crystal being warfare. "Jack," Anne said as they took a moment to catch their breath in an alcove. "If we don't make it, we'll make it," he interrupted. "I didn't spend all that time training you just to fail now." A squad of elite royal guards rounded the corner, their crystal forms blazing with Ray's control signal. Anne looked at Jack and made a quick hand signal, one of their training moves. "Pattern 7, he asked. "That's crazy." "Crazy works," she replied, and without waiting, she stretched her form up to the ceiling. Jack fired a spread of stun shots, forcing the guards to cluster together. At that moment, Anne dropped from above, her form wrapping around the entire group. Before they could react, she contracted sharply, sending them crashing into each other with perfect precision. Now that, Jack said admiringly, was beautiful. They reached the network control room doors to find Prince Ray waiting with his personal guard. The prince's perfect form seemed to crack slightly at the edges as he saw them. "Why won't you just die?" he snarled at Anne. "You're nothing but a defect, a mistake." "No." Anne's voice rang with authority. "I'm the future, and you're afraid of that." Ray screamed in rage and sent his guards attacking while he retreated into the control room. The guards moved with terrible speed, driven by his direct commands through the network. "Go," Jack shouted, laying down covering fire. "Stop him. I'll hold them here." Anne looked at him for a moment, her surface swirling with emotions. Then she flowed through a gap in the guards' formation, heading after her brother. "Be careful," Jack called after her, taking up a defensive position. "And remember, crazy works." The guards attacked, and Jack smiled grimly. Time to show them just how unpredictable a human could be. Anne flowed into the network control room like living mercury, finding her brother connected to the main console. Ray's perfect crystal form pulsed with red energy as he channeled commands through the network. "It's over, sister," he said without turning. "I control every crystal being in the Empire now. Soon, they'll all be perfectly ordered, perfectly controlled. No more chaos. No more imperfections." "You mean no more freedom," Anne replied, moving closer. "You're not creating order, Ray. You're creating slaves." Ray finally turned, his surface cracking slightly with madness. "I'm creating perfection. Something you could never understand. You flowing aberration." He pressed a control, and energy coursed through the room. The walls themselves came alive, crystal formations growing and attacking Anne like spears. But Anne had trained for this. Her fluid form slipped between the attacks, using the very flexibility Ray hated to survive. "Our people's strength was never in their rigid forms," Anne said, dodging another crystal spear. "It was in their choices, their individual thoughts. That's what you really hate, isn't it? That you can't control what people think." "Control is power," Ray screamed, sending more attacks. "Perfect order is perfect power." Anne moved closer, remembering Jack's lessons. "Stay unpredictable. Use your opponent's expectations against them." Ray expected her to retreat from his attacks. Instead, she flowed toward him. "What are you doing?" Ray backed away. "Stay back." "Showing you what real power is," Anne said, and transformed. Her form shifted and changed, taking on Ray's exact appearance. The prince stared in horror at his own face. "Stop that. Change back." "Why?" Anne asked in Ray's own voice, afraid to see what real evolution looks like. Ray attacked in blind rage, but his movements were predictable, perfect crystal being forms that Anne had trained to counter. She flowed around his strikes, her transformed state mimicking his appearance while moving in ways he never could. "I am the perfect hair," Ray shouted, his attacks growing wild. "I am the future." "No, brother," Anne said sadly. "You're the past." She struck 3 precise points on his form, the weak spots Jack had taught her, and Ray crumpled. His connection to the network console broke, and throughout the palace, crystal beings began waking from his control. The door burst open, and Jack ran in, showing signs of battle but grinning. Guards are coming back to themselves. Ray's control is broken. You did it. Anne shifted back to her natural flowing form and smiled at him. We did it. All that training paid off. Royal security forces streamed in, no longer under Ray's control. They secured the fallen prince as the king himself entered, his impressive crystal form radiating authority. Father, Anne bowed, suddenly uncertain. I can explain. The king raised a hand. No need. We saw everything through the network once Ray's control broke. He looked at his son sadly. We saw his madness, his assassination attempts, his plot to enslave our people. He turned to Anne, his surface brightening. We also saw your strength, daughter, not just in battle, but in spirit. You could have killed him, but you chose to save him. And all our people, instead. I had a good teacher, Anne said, smiling at Jack. The king nodded. Indeed, which is why I have made a decision. He faced the gathered crowd. The royal succession passes to Princess Anne. Her imperfections are actually evolution, the next step for our people. She will lead us into a future where we can be both strong and adaptable. Anne's surface swirled with emotion. Father, I thank you. The king turned to Jack. And you, human, will you stay? Our princess seems to have learned much from your unconventional methods. Jack looked at Anne, who was trying very hard to look royal and not hopeful. He smiled. Well, he said, someone has to keep teaching her crazy ideas. Anne's surface lit up with joy, and around them, the empire began to change, becoming something new, something that flowed like water while remaining strong as crystal.